Good morning. My name is Alia Azariah. I'm the director of aftercare for Safe House Project. And so my role is getting to serve those who serve survivors, is what I get to do here and bring you all conversations and trainings and professionals who hopefully can be great resources to you and the work that you're doing with survivors every day. We are going to be here for 1 hour today, going to be talking about the power of relationship and community as it comes to healing from trafficking and serving survivors. And we're going to be exploring how relationship and community are not just compassionate ideals, but they're truly evidence-based, trauma-responsive interventions in these types of traumas that people who have experienced exploitation and trafficking have experienced. And so our hope with this webinar is that we're going to center lived experience, research, and practical application to demonstrate to you all that relational care is one of the most powerful tools that we actually have for long-term healing. So I'm excited to introduce our panelists to you. I'm going to go ahead and start with Dr. Denisha Carle. She currently serves as the co-founder and executive director of an organization called Village is Possible. She comes to this work by way of her own lived experience. She's originally from the occupied Ohlone lands of Oakland, California. Her family has experienced the social toxicity of the crack cocaine epidemic and oppressive structures that systematically tore Black families apart in the 80s, and the grooming, abduction, and sexual violence that's been perpetuated against Black girls. And so by 18, she made it her purpose to support others navigating through the foster system, both youth and parents, as she understood how these waters cultivated the ideal exploitive environments for those that were trapped within its folds. And so today she's a community healer, complex trauma survivor, a scholar, a practitioner, and a village keeper. I love that she says her spirit is that of a hummingbird filled with joy and a sense of peace, as navigating these experiences have taught her the expansiveness in every situation and the wisdom that comes from our own wounds. She roots her practice in love and restoration, and she especially embodies the healing-centered engagement with children, youth, and families. So she's served foster care and juvenile justice impact youth in various capacities for 17 years. She holds a doctorate of educational leadership with an emphasis in social justice, her licensure in clinical social work, and pupil personnel services credential. But with all of those degrees and things, she just hopes to someday be the hood mama for her entire village and anyone in need of community. So thank you so much, Dr. Niche, for being present with us today.
Appreciate it.
Dr. Heather Evans is a licensed clinical social worker with a group counseling practice in Pennsylvania with over 20 years of experience specializing in sexual trauma specifically. She's authored 2 books, one of which we use within our organization on post-traumatic growth from her research on complex trauma and post-traumatic growth in sex trafficking survivors. She's also the co-founder of the Valley Against Sex Trafficking and the founder of the Voices of Survivors Project. She travels locally and internationally, specializing in working with trauma survivors and training caregivers and communities in trauma-informed care. So thank you, Dr. Evans, for being here as well. And last but certainly not least, my friend Angie Kahn. She is a passionate educator and leader who empowers individuals to embrace their authentic self. In 2018, she founded She Who Dares Consulting LLC. And in 2022, again, I should have prepped this with you before, Angie. Is it Kintsugi?
Kintsugi and flow.
Kintsugi and Flow Therapeutic Yoga, focusing on non-traditional healing and post-traumatic growth. Her mission is to create spaces for survivors of sexual trauma to thrive through radical self-compassion and tailored therapeutic approaches. Angie travels nationwide to educate and equip direct service professionals and effectively supporting the most vulnerable populations. She believes that many times behaviors and are the language of unaddressed trauma. And so to truly understand the person, those behaviors must be identified and the underlying trauma must be given opportunities to heal. And Angie also works with the Cool Ant series and with Ending the Game as well. So if you utilize those with any of the youth that you serve, you very likely have seen her face before. So thank you all for joining us. All right, we're going to jump right in. So let's orient ourselves a little bit, help us understand why we're here. Why are we talking about this? We know that survivors, I mean, the majority of us, even on this panel, are survivors of exploitation, right? So we know that survivors often carry deep wounds in the area of trust and connection. Why is relationship not just supportive, but actually clinically essential for healing? And what have you seen that proves that? Who wants to start?
All right, I'll start and
Go
then
for it.
okay. Maybe in the future you can pick on us if we're
Yeah.
gonna be shy. So I'm coming from a perspective of clinical, sitting with survivors, working with survivors in the community, and then research. And so I think what I'll do is talk about my research, though these things I've very much seen as true in my work in the community with survivors. The research that I did through the lens of complex trauma and post-traumatic growth, did in-depth interviews as well as use photo voice to really look at what was the impact of trauma and then to hear directly from the voices of survivors what was found helpful and not helpful after they left the trafficking experience. And what was so profound for me, and that's why I agree, I love this topic so much, is one of my favorite pieces of data that came out of it was that overwhelmingly described the greatest need and what they found most helpful in the healing process was relationship. And it was a variety of forms of relationship. It was probation officers, mentors that they met through local coalitions or organizations, therapists, social workers, sponsors, people from the community that became adopted family members. And it was this description of if the relationship is the greatest tool of the exploiter, then relationship is the greatest form of healing from the community. It's the reversal of the trauma experience. It's people who come alongside that just believed in them, that served as mirrors as identity was formed, that reflected and showed examples of what relationship should look like. So again and again, it was relationship is the greatest form of healing. And I think why is it so important? It's that reversal of the trauma. It's that reversal of the exploitation of relationship, one of the most precious things of our humanity that is used to exploit. And it's the reversal of that.
Thank you. I loved what you said about people serving as mirrors. I think that's a really powerful space. Yeah. Angie or Dr.
Yeah.
Niche, do you want to touch on that?
I'm like relationship is the first experience any human being comes into the world experiencing. And so I'm a nerd on studying trauma in the brain. And there was an experiment that they did in the 70s called the still face experiment with babies, where like we need that connection. And with the experiment, it just made me so uncomfortable. But there was a child that was very connected to its mother, to their mother, but the mother was told to like not even make an expression. And the panic that came over this child was just radical. And we hear all the time about failure to thrive babies, and we need that connection to one another. And so, I believe that we repeat what we don't repair, and we can really, as we connect, when I started connecting to community after my experience with exploitation and foster care, I felt like I had come home. And it's really hard to put into words, but I just felt like although there was a lot of wounds that I knew needed to be healed and I needed to address, there was just this unspoken connection that happened in that integration into community with people that experienced some of similar things.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so well said. Just uplifting some points from that around just that we have those early templates, like we are wired as relational beings. And so at early ages, you start to establish like the baby, the trust and mistrust. And so what we know to be true is that those who have encountered the foster care system or juvenile carceral system, 60% of them end up being involved in sex trafficking. And so when you look at that, you kind of reverse it, right? And like what Dr. Evans was saying, unpacking the initial relational component. So when you have an early part that's founded on mistrust of, disrupting boundaries and starting to wire around that, then you have a young person who comes through the foster care system and then through the sex trafficking system, and then you're starting to try to relate with them again. So being aware that there's an early priming where you have, just like an infant or a young child who's like, I want to connect, just like Angie was saying, right? Like, I want to relate. And then you have someone who, for their own trauma responses and reasons, aren't able to give that back to them. And so they're starting to shape that in a way that, causes harm to them over the course of time. And so often there's still that need to have relationship, but now it looks like pain, right? Now love looks like taking something from me, that it's not just that I deserve to be related to and to have community and connection with. So it's all of those unpacking. And so really coming in with an authentic way of relating to help soothe the nervous system and start to wire along the lines of compassion and love and unconditional regard and things of that nature, which so often can feel so foreign at first. But then once they feel into that, it's like, oh, wow, like that's way better than how I was connecting with that before. So just also like uplifting the ways in which relationship has been wired, both in our families of origin, and then when you end up being trafficked, the ways in which relationship is wired there. And then you're working with the youth who still wants relationship, but really wanting to help them see that they have choice and how that relationship can come about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So let's talk about community. I think especially in this field and in this work, community is a word that is, I see it frequently. We hear it often, but it's usually vague or symbolic when it's used. So from your all's perspective, what does true community actually look like when it's intentional about supporting survivor healing? How is it different from just a program, an organization, a support group? Dr. Nisha, I'm going to pick on
Yeah,
you.
yeah, I was ready. I was like, yes, this is my jam.
I know.
For us, community looks like village. We co-founded Village is Possible alongside survivors who have matriculated through the foster care system. And really, this notion of understanding that not just it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village to be whole and to raise yourself. And so understanding that, so some of us on the call are trained as social workers, right? And so you have this ecological model where you have, the young person or the individual in the center of the circle, and then you have the next layer, which is like family and community and schools, and then you have the next layer of systems, and you keep on having all these layers out expanding into the land and all the things. So recognizing that at every layer of that ecosystem, there needs to be village, there needs to be community. So often I'm talking with social workers around who's a part of your community so that you have a space to be able to regulate and ground and exhale and feel supported so that you can come alongside a young person who's experiencing this in an authentic way. And so recognizing that we need each other. I was that, C-sex social worker for a number of years that would just show up at 3 a.m. with that call or traveling to Timbuktu, hopping on planes. And then it leads to burnout, right? Because I didn't have community. I didn't have connection. I was the one all be all. So recognizing that community truly means village and an expansion of what are the resources that are needed, both around that young person in the center of the ecosystem, but also for all of those other layers that extend out among them as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think so many times, especially for youth and for survivors of this extreme type of trauma, relationships become transactional. And so you're kind of at a very early age, reading body language, reading micro expressions, and navigating that. And so when you come into a genuine community, it's really hard to trust that the people are authentic, because people have always said what they wanted to say to get what they wanted. And so I believe that true community is person centered over program centered. Yes, we have to have our structures for our programs, super important. However, I think where a lot of programs fail survivors of exploitation and foster youth is they're not centering on the person and the autonomy of that person. They're just kind of doing almost, a shadowing of what's happened in their life before, with the rigidity, and just kind of not asking them for input, not allowing them to explore different types of other types of therapies beyond just talk therapy. Because for me, like, talk therapy didn't work. And so really creating those, like what was said, just all of those little points of access at the different stages and different places that people will intersect.
Yeah.
So
Thank
well
you.
said. I'm nodding at everything that's been said so far. And just to add to that, yeah, I think we have to. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. I'll say that for anybody that's worked in this field long enough, I think you recognize that we have to think outside of the box of traditional services and even what professionalism looks like in this work. How do we remain professional? Because boundaries are absolutely essential and actually are very trauma informed. Yet, how do we think outside of the box in order to meet this need, this philosophical relational need? So some of the things we have to think about is that relationship and community mean being in it for the long haul. And how do we think beyond our programs if our programs have a certain length of time? Who's going to be with them to acknowledge their birthdays? Who's going to go with them to difficult appointments? Who are the ones they can call when they have good news or scary news? Who's going to be there at funerals? Who's going to be there at childbirths? We have to think about that, or we're doing survivors a disservice if we just cut it off at a certain point. I think community is this life on life. It's relational, it's consistency, it is boundaried, but it's transparency. It's doing what we say we will do and providing support, like you said, not just a program, but in the context of relationship. And I think about one thing we've done in our community, that we do have a support group, a survivor support group for those in the community, and we have some residential programs as well. But all of us seek to provide a collaboration within our region. And I hope that as survivors see that, they see that as we trust each other as organizations, that helps build trust. They see that we're not siloed, because what happened during exploitation? You're siloed, you're isolated. So in order for them to see that this is different, we have collaboration with organizations. So we do a lot of joint events. We do an annual retreat and things like that. And that is not it. That's not it. But those are things that emphasize to them that we have these organizations that are working together. We have providers or allies that care about each other and work together really well. And we're providing a space where allies and survivors come together and have shared experiences, no story sharing, no need to say who you are, what your role is. You don't even know who's a survivor lived experience, who's an ally, you don't know that. We're just individuals coming together and having a shared experience. And that weaves a fabric of trust over time that's also creating community, not just with allies, but with each other.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, you guys are bringing just a lot into my own mind as I'm thinking of like youth or adults that I've worked with and walked alongside and just watched. Yeah, like how powerful it can be to have just people in our lives who follow us regardless of our circumstance, right? And that's
Mhm.
we're going to talk about barriers here in a second, but like just thinking through like, wow, what have some of the barriers to those things been? And a lot of our services, right, focus on where that person lives in that moment. Right. And then they lose that community
Mm.
if they're a youth, if they like have to move, go to a different placement or whatever, they'll lose the community that they did there, and how difficult, like what a relational wound that creates, right? When you just had this community and now in order to have a place to live, you lose that community. What, from y'all's perspective, and you touched a little bit on some of these already, But what are some of the barriers, whether they're personal barriers, systemic barriers, cultural barriers, relational barriers? What are those barriers that you see to creating authentic connection and community? Yeah, and how do we address some of those to build spaces that are safe and mutual and lasting, like you said, Dr. Evans? I know you all have so much to say. I know. Go ahead, Angie.
Of course, trust is a huge
Yeah.
barrier, right? It takes so long. And I think a lot of people get tired sometimes, and understandably so. You know, with survivors, we're not always the easiest to work with. I was one of those youth that was, I'm going to push you away before you have a chance to push me away. And so a lot of that, like, transpired throughout even my parenting, in my early parenting, and my relationships. And you know, I think that, you know, to really get that authentic connection, we've got to start to really get down and talk about the trauma stuff of, did a teaching on sexual health and intimacy after exploitation, like, and it was a survivor only space, and everyone in there said, we've never talked about this before. There were people in there that didn't know the different types of intimacy, because it's not just sexual intimacy that where that scarred us, right? It's intellectual intimacy, it's physical intimacy, it's all these experiential intimacy. So I think, you know, building those spaces, I call them brave spaces, because safe spaces, you know, sometimes we can't guarantee safety. And I do wilderness therapy a lot for myself. And, you know, one of the things they say, we can't guarantee that you're going to be safe. There's wild animals, there's, you know, there's all of these unknowns out here, but we can guarantee that you'll have a brave space to try something new, maybe for the first time, or have an opportunity to open yourself up to maybe something that you've never tried before, with support and with care and with kindness. And I think those are the first steps, is creating those spaces where we're talking about, what does healthy relationships look like? You know, what is healthy parenting? Because we repeat what we don't repair. And that was one of the things. I didn't have healthy parents. I grew up in, you know, foster care. So like, what does that look like with my kids, so that I'm not passing that generational trauma onto them? When connecting with juveniles, you know, in systematic, like, there are so many barriers there that, you know, we need, you know, every part and every person that is working in this field to come alongside these youth and adults, and just, you know, just walk alongside without, you know, expecting, you know, without, you know, that condition, because conditions have been put on relationships from birth for a lot of many survivors. So, and it takes time, and it can get tiring. So I, you know, was said earlier, you know, really taking care of ourselves well as we're doing this work.
Yeah, trust was on the top of my list in thinking about barriers. Another barrier that I think is often not named, and similarly it might not be talked about, is shame. And just the shame that comes along with what, you know, just the trauma and the exploitation. And a lot of that predates exploitation, you know, shame that kind of went into that and then was just perpetuated, and then coming out, just ongoing stigma, like misunderstanding from family members and service providers. So many survivors tell me they're the ones that are having to educate their therapists and their social workers, etc. And I think that we need to do better in, like, the heavy lifting of being educated and educating ourselves, but also educating others. And so that when survivors come, they're not, you know, having a deer in headlights look from a therapist that just perpetuates that shame rather than mitigates it. So that would be just one simple thing, and really being aware of tokenism as well, that we're putting those with lived experiences, that we're using them within our organizations versus treating them as subject matter experts, and coming alongside them appropriately, compensating them appropriately. That's kind of a side note. But in terms of another way to address the shame, again, it goes back to relationship. Brene Brown's research on relationship, I think, is so beautifully kind of coincides with how we can think about coming along survivors. She talks about the importance of empathy and authenticity and togetherness, and replacing shame with honor, just treating people with human dignity. So I think naming shame is important, but then how do you heal from shame? It happens in the context of relationship where you're just restoring dignity, restoring choice, and treating someone with empathy and authentic connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, all of these things. I love how when you posed the question to us, Alia, you brought up like what are the barriers on like the personal level, the systemic level, and also the cultural level, and just also uplifting like the lack of culturally responsive service deliveries that we have, the ways in which, families have systemically been torn apart. We're seeing that in real time today. I won't get on that soapbox, but just to uplift it. And so the importance of making sure that you're coming alongside a young person and honoring and acknowledging their cultural identity. Dr. Sean Jenwright, his work is all around healing centered engagement, and he has 30 years of experience working with youth in inner city schools. And he really talks about that key component around identity formation. And that's so important with survivors as well, right? It's like having that fragmentation within your identity during that experience, and then making sense of like what identities did I have before? Who am I now as you're navigating that? And really being able to uplift culture as one of those pieces to kind of help like bridge that. And it's been simple things of us working with young people and like just cooking foods from their native land, right? And they're like, oh my God, I haven't had a Peruvian meal in 10 years because none of my foster parents did that.
Mm.
And helping young people establish like altars wherever they are. That way they have a sense of like grounding and purpose and community. And so just also uplifting that part, right? Where a key thing that has also been fragmenting is like their culture and how that can be a place that we can come in and offer some restoration.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about bridging that trust barrier, right? Like that honoring of like feeling seen in your cultural space and your cultural identity is such a powerful way to bridge that trust barrier as well. The food piece was the first thing. I feel like it's such a powerful and yet like genuinely such an easy way to honor someone's culture, right? And like to learn to mess up, to not do it perfectly, to like have the experience of doing it together. And I've seen so many, that's been some of like my favorite stories that I have heard from like some of the safe homes that we have worked with is ways that they have done that, that even in these environments that are like inherently more structured and like more boundaried, that they are able to have like kind of this freedom of expression and build trust in food is such a powerful way to do that. I'm even thinking of like, man, like if if someone on this webinar is somebody who is like involved in systems or in the policies related to like how relationships are built, like I've even just experienced barriers contractually or like red tape that have created difficulties with forming relationship and community. Like I have a contract with an awesome agency who specifically like brought me in to create community with a specific youth, and because of the way like insurance things are written and these it's been very difficult to form that community, not in general but in to build on it and to have it be what it could be, because there is like red tape written into like our governmental systems and contracts and things like that, right? So like there are even just these things that are red tape that are like, man, can we find just exceptions to these things so that young people, adults, youth who have experienced this, who need this community as like an evidence-based intervention, can have access to those things. And I think that's often a way that we forget that we have created these barriers with our policies and with our structures and our systems that harm community.
One of the other barriers I was thinking as you all were talking too, I did my third year of my yoga therapy on disenfranchised grief. And so that grief that we carry in our bodies of not having the childhood that you deserve to have is, I mean, as a child, like you're supposed to be loved and cared for, or not having some of the experiences maybe other peers have had, that is like a passage or a rite of passage, or yeah, just kind of being abandoned, and all of the things that come with grief, and not really addressing the trust, the grief, the shame, all of those things too. And so I think when we start to acknowledge and give space for that grief, it's that I love ritual and releasing. And so it's a form of releasing so that your arms are open for new experiences. Because if you're so full of the old stuff and the old experiences and the trauma, you're not giving that room and that space. And so creating those places, that shame can be dismantled, that that culture can be embraced, that grief can be acknowledged, because people want to be seen, validated, and loved. And those are our like, truly our basic needs. Is when somebody says, I see you. I was in my 40s before a therapist said that to me, and I broke down and hysterically cried, and it was just this visceral response to like feeling like I had never been seen in that way before. So
Yeah, thank you, Angie. Let's talk about how this plays out with each of you in your work. You've all kind of touched on it a little bit, and you do all intentionally integrate relationships and community. So can you share, what does that look like practically for you? What does it look like in your day-to-day or in how you built the organizational model? Dr. Nish, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, so Village is Possible. Our foundational framework is healing centered engagement and somatic healing. We do a lot of, like, we start off every meeting with breath work, and grounding, really recognizing that we are all like, if we all on our team have complex trauma, and so we all have nervous systems that are coming in pretty ramped up, especially if you just finished working with a client, and or maybe there's a conflict on the team. And so just having like a central base of like, hey, we come in, we ground, we breathe, it allows our bodies to get out of that I'm ready to fight you now mode and like access the prefrontal cortex. And then having healing centered engagement as a platform, right, where basically, with someone had asked in the Q&A, so I dropped information about Dr. Chanjan, right? But he has what he calls the 4 pivots. So anytime that you're feeling like, I don't know what to do, I don't know what's going on, you should check yourself along 4 different domains. So the first is in your awareness, right? Like, am I looking at this from my own narrow lens, or am I holding up a mirror around how this is impacting me, so that I can regulate and come alongside and really be able to see what it is that you're trying to show and tell me. The second is in your presence, right? And that's why the breath work, the grounding, being here now is so important. The third is in your relationship, really checking to see if it's a transactional thing that you're doing, or if you're really leaning into transformation where you're connecting in your humanity. And the fourth is in your vision. So we're so used to just seeing a problem, I want to solve it, right? Like I got a remedy for that. But instead, really expanding out to be more expansive in like, what else can we bring in? So we do a lot of like imagination and drawing and journaling and things like that. So I think it's so important to have like really like whatever that framework is for you, that model built into your organization, because it carries into the work that you do. There's nothing that we're asking youth in the community to do that our staff ourselves are not already doing. We're role playing, we're double dutching, we're drawing, like we're doing all these things.
Yes.
So we're doing our own inner child healing work. We're tending to our own baby that didn't get soothed. So we really have that model where this is a part of your own healing and wellness, as well as what you're gifting into the community and in your service. So that's for us, like something that's been really powerful, is making sure that it's not just something that we're teaching and learning and then going out and doing, but it's something that we're embodying ourselves.
Thank you. Yeah.
yeah, so good. Like pressing that pause button, we're in such a society that wants to push us, like, let's get this next thing done, let's see this next client, let's do this next. It's like rush from thing to thing and appointment to appointment. And really, for me, it's been really important to press the pause, to do the breath work, to do the grounding, to have the anchor points like in my daily life because it frees up more capacity to be able to sit with people. It frees up more capacity and patience for myself and for others. I can only, take someone as far as I've gone, or I've been willing to go myself. I can't lead anybody past that, because they're going to see through that. Survivors will see, kids, youth, survivors, they see through that. We have to be really authentic in that space. And so for me, when I created She Who Dares, He Who Dares, They Who Dare, however I identify as she, but like however you identify, it was really to just audaciously, jump into, the things that I was scared of. And for me, it's people think that it's confusing or conflicting for someone to go back into trauma, but if that's all you've ever known, I didn't know other little girls weren't experiencing the things I was experiencing. I thought like everybody, I didn't have a comparison model. And so, sometimes it can feel like, why would they go back to that? But if it's that familiarity. So building those new things of familiarity and giving those new spaces to be able to try something. Breath work, that's what the most important thing I feel like is breath work. If I can control my breath, I can control, my nervous system, my capacity, right? And so, it really is about just collaboration, like that's been said. Like so many organizations are competitive, and they, and that really is a disservice to our kids and our survivors, that we really need to come together, and because that's the only way like that we're going to build out these things that we've been talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely.
One phrase that keeps coming to mind as we're talking is a phrase a survivor in our community has said to me before. And she said she needed people who loved her aggressively. And of course, that doesn't sound very trauma informed, but what she meant is those who would stick with her, those who knew how to pursue her, those who could hold her accountable, though they were gentle in a fierce way. And, so I think that's just one thought, is just how do we model and embody love? And that's professional to professional, professional to survivor, survivor to survivor. Another thing is how to integrate relationships. It's just recognizing, again, that out of the box thinking. So thinking about meeting with individuals, and everybody I know has different capacities here, but if you're in residential work and that you're sometimes doing therapy sessions, outside or while driving to an appointment or things like that. I mean, it's just expanding, or while cooking dinner together, it's expanding the idea of, again, this life on life connection. I think it's important that we think about connecting survivors with each other, connecting survivors with mentors or people in the community that can, again, be with them for the long haul. And that might mean training the community. There's sometimes people that come to our organizations that have really willing hearts that can do a lot of damage if we don't provide trauma-informed care training and then ongoing mentorship of those mentors. But when it's done well, when they're trained and they really are like kind of checking in with their own expectations of why they want to get involved, why they want to come alongside. And when there's mentoring along the way, it can be beautiful. Beautiful relationships can be formed, but it needs to be done with great care. And I think we need to probably do more, because it's, again, thinking about the long haul and how do we connect survivors with this safety net that they need. And so, again, some of the ways that we've done that is just really trying to have collaboration, have unified activities. And that way, those who are in residential care in our area are meeting survivors that are a few steps ahead of them in the community or a few steps behind them. And they're building these ongoing relationships that when those survivors leave the residential program, they could have support in the community. They have events, they have activities to be a part of. But most of all, they have relationships. They have ongoing text threads that they can check in with each other. But those things are all done very organically, yet intentionally. So there's structure behind them, even though the feel of them is quite organic. And I can't emphasize enough mutuality. That when volunteers are trained, when there are professionals that may not have lived experience, that we talk to them about how do you carry yourselves and your power, that it's life on life, it's a mutuality. It's, who said it? I think it was you, Dr. Nish, of like, you're all doing the same things, the things that you provide to clients, you're participating in as well. And I think there's a humility that comes with that breeds trust in relationship.
That was so powerful. Thank you. I think especially like that piece around mentorship and continued training, because even like I'm a person with lived experience. I work in this field full time. I train people on how to do this well. And the youth specifically that I'm in relationship and that I build community with, I have multiple people that I call for guidance on
Yeah.
that. Like multiple people who, both people with lived experience, people who are clinicians, to be like, am I on track with this? Like, is my own like just adoration for this youth, like maybe blinding like how I could be serving them well, like,
Mm, yeah,
am the own check-ins, even though I'm constantly learning, I'm constantly feeling like I need those people to walk.
absolutely.
I'm walking alongside the people that I'm walking alongside. So heavy on that and just everything that you said. Thank you. Dr. Niche, I saw you unmuted. Do you have something you want to say?
No, that was beautiful. There's background noise. I was like, I didn't want to take away from Dr. Evans. The only thing I'll add is an educator, Ms. T, she calls it vulnerageousness. So the
Mm.
importance of being vulnerable and how much courage it takes to do that. But just
Oh,
they're uplifting that's like such a key point in transformational relationships, and just echoing how important peer mentorship, survivor leader mentorship is.
Yeah.
I see it in the chat, people saying it's necessary. So I just want to put an exclamation mark next to that. It is necessary.
And when we talk about those barriers, there are even more barriers, and we could do a whole nother webinar on barriers to getting having relationship with people with lived experience, those kind of more systemic, like red tape type barriers that make it difficult for people with lived experience to be in community with each other and with those who need. And that's something we could talk about at another time. But yeah, I mean, I know Angie and I have talked at length about how important that community is and relationship, and I think like from like my perspective, it is the most powerful thing to be involved in the life of somebody who is still actively maybe dealing either living in exploitation, in the cycle of exploitation, or who is more activated by their experience of exploitation than I am presently. It is
mm,
the most powerful experience to get to like show up for the people who like for and not to like put it on us, but it's so often being like, wow, what does it mean? Like it's like showing up for little
Yeah.
me when I show up. Not that I'm like
Yeah.
transferring, but even just being like, wow, look at who you've become, little you, that you're now able to show up for this person.
There's something powerful that heals us as we working with other people. Like it's we're healed in this small group. I did a healing intensive for my own self, and it was like a 6-day intensive. That's a year's worth of therapy. We had a small group, and as we watched one another walk through our traumas and our situations and talk about it and then do some psychodrama around that, like our hearts were healed too. Like our hearts were healing in that community, and that's why this is such an important topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get to some of the questions before we get to that last question that I have for you guys. I think this one from Bobby in our chat in our Q&A here. She asked, how important do you think it is to have healthy volunteer presence in the village or community? And how, well, let's start with that. Let's start with that part of the question.
Yeah,
yes,
I think
I
it's,
think.
yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead, Heather.
I think it's important. I mean, it takes a village. That's that's the theme here is it really takes a village. So what people that are, I mean, it's not just for professionals and it like frankly, it's helpful to have people that maybe don't have, I mean, it don't have lived experience. It's just the variety, the diversity, the different kinds of maybe experiences that someone can bring. So what's important is motivation and teachability and consistency, like boundaries. I mean, there's a lot that needs to go into place of having a good volunteer program, and it takes somebody that's monitoring those volunteers and working with them on an ongoing basis in terms of secondary trauma, in terms of just any issues that might come up. But I think, yes, I think it's important and valuable.
Yeah, there's something that I work with an organization locally that has volunteers as mentors, and there's something for specifically people who have like been in the foster system or other system involved when they learn like you're not getting paid to be with me. That is really
Mm,
powerful.
mhm,
Angie, go ahead.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest, some of the biggest barriers is a lot of times, and not to step on people's toes, but a lot of times we can come into a volunteer position like self-serving, like to make ourselves feel, because we have a wound in our heart that we're not willing to step into
Yeah,
because we're not comfortable with holding our own pain and sometimes holding others. So we're about the work we do. We identify as the work we do instead of the person that we are because we exist. And so, you have a lot of times people that are in these positions of volunteering that aren't willing to take a step back and go, I
mm,
think I need to learn my own triggers. I think I need to work on some of my own, work. And it can do a lot more damage. And so it's really important, again, like that was said, to have those, accountability check-ins, to have debriefings, to have all of those things with your volunteers and with your people that are working around you, to be able to maintain that accountability and that authenticity and quality of care that we want to give to survivors.
yeah, absolutely. And another piece I think that gets for be looked over in that is volunteers need just as much, if not more, training and continued education and support. It is
mm,
not necessarily easing the burden of staff. Like we
mm,
can't look at volunteers as like easing a burden or making something easier. It needs to be just as they just happen to not be paid and be doing this more sacrificial in
mm,
that place, but they need just as much support in order to do
mm,
this well.
mhm.
Dr. Nish, do you have anything you want to add around volunteers?
I think that the only thing I would add that's come up for us, because we cultivate like youth-centered spaces. So sometimes we've had a lot of people be like, I want to volunteer, I want to help. But when you have too much of a adult volunteer presence in ratio to like a youth presence, then it can be offsetting.
Totally.
So just being aware of that, like, because as providers, we can be like, oh my gosh, we got 20 people that signed up and they just want to come and help. And then you have 10 youth and they're like, stop bothering me. Like, so just to also uplift
Yes.
that, like being
Mhm,
intentional about how
mhm,
volunteers are used and, cultivating the sacredness around when youth just want youth space or peer support space. And I think it was brought up in the chat, and also the panelists have said it too, is just making sure that it's trauma informed, ongoing training and support that's being provided for those volunteers. Because it can feel like, oh, I know this, and then things happen, and you focus on that with your staff, right? Because you have all of the infrastructures built up for that. And for volunteers, it might just be like a once a month or something like that. And so really making sure, and that's why I love like shameless plug for Cool Aunt series and ending the game and other programs like that, right? Because for people who want to volunteer with us, we're always being like, start here, plug in here. Where are the community cafes that the state are holding? Like going back into the community, right in the village, like really being aware of the resources because we can't do all and be everything. So really tapping into what's available so you can continue to get this ongoing training and support so that when we call on you, you're showing up in a way that is, helpful.
mhm.
Absolutely. I love that. Okay, going back to kind of my last question for you guys. If if we believe that all of this is true, if we really believe that relationship is the intervention, what's one shift, big or small, that you'd love to see the field, more programs, or more providers make to reflect that truth?
I'm going to go. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
All right. I'm going to go with the idea of that I know I've really already mentioned, but thinking long term. What and who will outlast the length of your program? Who will stay with the survivors for the long haul? What do you need to be doing now to be connecting them, educating, preparing them, making introductions to individuals in the community or what, however, survivors need forming relationships, they need to form relationships that will last. So what can you do now to be thinking about that and help facilitate that so they're not dropped off when your particular services end?
Yep.
Yeah. Beautifully put. Just to, expand on it, is making sure that the relationships and connections you're making are also outside of their exploitation. So
Mm,
often we can get hyper focused on this part. And I love how someone put in the chat, Dr. Jen writes, key term is what else is true. And so
mm,
recognizing that you're working with a whole child, and so they have all these other interests. So anchoring them in those relationships with all those other interests as well.
right.
Yeah, you took the words out of
Okay.
my mouth. That's what play
I
and
love this. I love this panel.
I really would love to see more play and more curiosity put into
Mhm,
programs, because the
mhm,
person's life has been so centered around trauma, and like it's been so intense. And what does that look like to just play? Or what does that look like to find out other things? Like, what other things are true about me? What things
mhm,
do I like? What are my interests? What are my hobbies? Never did I think that I wanted to be a roller derby girl. Like, I like to do that or do aerial arts or something that I never had an
mhm,
opportunity to do. And so, there's been times I've ran with survivors through water sprinklers, and we've done sidewalk chalk and just fun things that sometimes can get lost in the shuffle of healing work. It's important to take those play pauses and just
mhm,
really enjoy and the laughter around us and the community around us that we're building, right? Instead of just constantly working on building it, enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, there's one more question in the chat that I want to ask you all and see what you guys are thinking when it comes to building relationship. And the reason I'm asking is because I think the question around like making sure these relationships are not transactional
mm,
is very important. Their question is specifically around like how can law enforcement or prosecutors do better? But I think we can broaden that question because there are lots of people who are going to come in relationship with or in need to have some sort of a relationship with a person who's experienced exploitation, but they have a very specific job. And so, like using law enforcement or prosecutors or probation as an example, right? Like they have a very specific job that does create barriers to having that person be an authentic, like a true part of the significant support system, right? So for those people who have this very specific job that creates those barriers, how can they do better? How can they build a relationship with this person that is more genuine and that isn't solely transactional?
I think they have to do their own work, and it's hard. It's hard. It's that mirror that we talked about at the very beginning is
mm,
it's really doing that own work and not taking it also personal, because each person is on a journey of healing. And so a lot of times we'll take it personal if they don't do what we say, because we're in a very authoritarian type of environment sometimes, and we've got to go beyond that, because it's not working. It's not worked for us. And so yeah, and that's hard, especially sometimes for professionals to sit in that and to be willing to do that.
Yeah.
So
Meeting them in their humanity, right?
yeah,
So often it's
yeah.
like this automatic criminalization, or you're just trying to extract information. Some entities have like forensic interview process where the first point of contact is actually with a licensed clinician to kind of
Mhm,
help get the story out. So the law enforcement is like, hey, I'm just going to introduce you to this therapist for you to be able to share. So just having some kind of trauma informed way in
yeah.
which you are working through that process and also meeting the young person in their humanity.
Yep.
I think Rachel Thomas talks about it in her story of like the, police officer offering her water and just like having
Yes.
conversation and stuff, right? Like those basic essentials, right? Like you see, I see, like Angie said, I see you. So starting there instead of starting from the extraction.
And honesty and authenticity in your role.
Mhm.
right? Like law enforcement does not necessarily need to be the point person. Like this is where
Mhm.
it's so that collaboration is so important. Like who can be the person that shows up for the youth? Like I've had probation, that has chosen to contract with an outside agency or with a survivor or whatever to be more of the like social emotional support. Because when a disclosure comes in a certain way from a person, if you're disclosing that to a law enforcement officer, they have their role. Like they have this specific job and their role is not necessarily to create space for like the conversation around these experiences, right? And it's okay for us to have our differing roles, but when we show up in a space that is blurry or inauthentic or without like clarity of what can be said in this space and what's going to happen with that information if it's said in this space, like that breeds distrust, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just agree with everything said and would just add just good trauma-informed training, but that really gets to the nitty-gritty of what does it mean to be, how does trauma impact? How does it show up? What does it mean to be trauma-informed? What does it mean to offer choice? What does it mean to be transparent? Like you were just saying, transparent in your role. What does it mean to make sure you don't promise what you can't fulfill? And making sure that there's collaboration with law enforcement and local services and resources so that they're getting them connected to safety and stabilization, and doing so in, like has been said, just the most human dignifying approach. I think I'm answering this question just still with this reality of the transactional nature of law enforcement coming alongside survivors. Yet if all is done in the name of we see you as a human being, we want to get you this kind of support and resources and help. And I think when law enforcement has those when there's opportunities in a community for collaboration between service providers and law enforcement, we can hopefully work together for that trauma-informed approach and keeping the humanity of the person first and foremost in how law enforcement is going about their particular processes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And just for taking your time. I know, Dr. Nish, you have somewhere to be right away, and I have already kept you guys over a minute, but I just want to thank
Mhm.
each for your willingness to show up and to share your expertise and to be a part of this conversation. It is important. You all are the perfect panel for this conversation. So I'm so glad that we could have each of you on. Thank you for our attendees for prioritizing your own education and furthering your knowledge on serving people who've experienced exploitation. I hope to see you all again next month.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.